Gentlemen, the Florida Citrus Hall of Fame has two missions, and one is to recognize people who've made significant contributions to the industry. And we have a number of them in Mount Dora, in fact, who are in the Hall of Fame, Jimmy Simpson and Jack Norris. The second mission of the Hall of Fame, though, is to tell the story of the Florida citrus industry. And one way we do that is through oral histories. So we're going to talk about citrus, your involvement in citrus here in Mount Dora and everything else. But before we do that, we have to make sure that our videographer has everything correct. So I turn around and I tell him I'm John Jackson, John Jackson, and this is...
I'm Tom Hurlbert, Hurlburt.
And I'm Sam Sadler III, Sadler.
All right, now that's out of the way, we're going to get going. What I'd like to do is we have a project in Lake County of putting up signs that are going to be a portal to a website, and these oral histories will be there and written information. So first of all, tell us about what it was like growing up in Mount Dora and a citrus family.
Well, my family, Dr. Sadler, came to Mount Dora in 1886, and he came down here to be part of the gold rush in Florida. So he moved down, he purchased 17 acres in downtown Mount Dora. He put 12 of it in a little seedling grove. And like all the early families, they didn't realize that Mother Nature could be so crude. We know of the many freezes of the 1856 and the 95 and the 98. So most of these pioneer families had a lot of land, but now they didn't have any trees to bear. And with the varieties of fruit back in those days, it took 6 to 8 years to bear. So each and all those families got in the cattle business, and they raised these yearlings to sell just to have some income. And my family and the Simpsons and the Hurlberts, they all ended up in the same thing. They were in the citrus business, but they were also in the cattle business. And then later on, in our generation, it turned around and the cattle were going out and the citrus became king.
Now, so your family's back to the early times was involved in citrus, and when's are they newcomers? They probably didn't get here till the...
Yeah, they didn't get here till about 19, well they were in Orlando in 19, my granddad graduated from Orlando High School in 1912, okay? And then he worked for a fellow who was kind of in citrus business named P. Phillips. And Howard and my granddad were good friends and everything, and so for years, as a matter of fact, I've got a telegram here that I can share with you. When my granddad went into the Navy, I guess it was World War I, Crip, and he went from Dr. Phillips to working for Dr. Phillips going in the Navy, and Dr. Phillips, and I've got a copy of the telegram, I'll show you later, sent a telegram to the Secretary of the Navy and said that he needed, if he could, to get Mr. Hurlbert Gerald Hurlbert released from duty because he was very important to his cattle and citrus operation in Orlando. And he said, my office is filled with a lot of incompetent men. And he said, citrus season is getting ready to start and I need him if you can let him go. And you believe it or not, they released my granddaddy, the Navy, and he came back and worked with Dr. Phillips in Orlando. They lived right across the lake from Dr. Phillips on Lake Lucerne in Orlando, where Westminster Towers is now, where my granddaddy was. Then they came up here to Tangerine. They came up here. They were late arrivals up here, but they got here in the 1930. They came to Tangerine, and that's when my granddad started running Mount Dora Growers Co-op.
Interesting. How many people got started with Dr. Phillips and ended up with someplace else, you know? And I've heard a few stories about Dr. Phillips, and rather an amazing guy. And you know, we kind of look at that and say, well, gee, he got a special favor. But I'm sure that your granddad probably had a greater impact on the war effort by being here and raising food efficiently than he would have toting a hose on some boat someplace. But anyway, so we
Yeah.
digress.
Most of the early families too, uh, you know, the citrus, when it did start really good production, just about all your families had their own little packing house, and they all packed fresh fruit to go up north. My family started a little fresh fruit packing house in '46, and and it was all fresh fruit, all shipped up north. It was taken over to the Lake Jim Depot, put on a rail car, and off it went. There was not hardly any concentrate at those years. So the fresh fruit market was, that was it. And all your towns, Mount Dora, I know of 3 or 4 old packing houses. They're gone now. But in every city was like that, whether it be Eustis or Zellwood. And I think this is where we finally come in and get into the co-ops that had bailed these little families out, because in the early days, 10 acres of citrus, you could raise a family off 10 acres. And of course, as time went on and technology went on and things, then you had to have 100 acres, and then you had to have 500 acres. So there's been a great evolution of going to where we're going today with Tom's granddad running the co-op up there.
Well, and the evolution of the packing houses was also similar to that. A small packing house could get by, and the small houses probably more or less parallel what we'd call gift fruit people now. You had a certain clientele that you were there and you packed fruit for them, and then it got to the point where you needed a bigger and bigger facility, and then the co-ops come along. And so Mount Dora Growers was the premier citrus co-op in Mount Dora. When I look at the records, the 4 biggest fresh fruit packers in Lake County for many, many years, Lake Region was first, Golden Gym was second, Mount Dora was third, and then Blue Goose and Claremont was fourth. And so tell me what you remember from your grandfather and the packing house. Did you go down there as a kid and play?
Man,
Or?
are you kidding me? Listen, I thought about that this morning, Sammy. When Sammy and I both work in the groves and packing houses and everything, our whole early life, okay? I mean, we fired groves, we toted irrigation pipes. Sammy'd ride by, be out there toting pipe, he'd blow the horn, you know. I mean, that's what we did. Irrigation pipe would be so hot you could hardly pick it up after you finally get to the last rows, you know. The end of that pipe had gotten pretty hot after that water had run through it when we were moving it. And but I thought about that today, and my father, Tom, who, when he retired from Plymouth Citrus Grower, PCPC, Plymouth Citrus Products Co-op, okay. After he got out of the Army, that's what he went back in the citrus business. And my dad worked at Mount Dora Growers in the packing house and in the field when he was in high school, okay. I worked in it in the wintertime. I'd make boxes down in the basement, Sammy, spruce boxes, and put them on the rack, and that old chain be going on those boxes going up to the women who were packing the fruit. And I thought the most modern thing I ever saw was we got that big staple thing where you made cardboard boxes, boom, 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 and old J.C. Durham was in charge of boxes. That's what he was in charge of. And we took the glue and stuck the label on the side of the box when it was shipped up north. And so I spent my winters, or kind of a little part-time job, working in the packing house, you know, especially when, like, there'd be an embargo coming up and they were running until midnight. You know that. And here I was, a kid up there, 14 years old, doing that stuff. And then, of course, in the summertime, when my buddies, like Sammy'd ease off every once in a while, but when my buddies would go to Daytona and hang out, at the end of the school year, they'd say, "Man, or in the summer, they'd say, "Dad, gum, Tommy, you must have got to go to the beach a lot. You're all tan. Man, you look good." You know what it was from? Spraying oil on orange trees. I mean, I'd be spraying that oil on a tree.
You're on the end of the handgun, right?
Yeah, on a hand rig, not on a speed sprayer. We had speed sprayer, but no, I was on a handgun crew for smaller groups.
On young trees.
Around somebody's house, for young trees, they didn't want you spraying everything. Yeah. And so here I am out there, and John, I'm not kidding you. At the end of summer, I mean, I looked like I had been raised in the Bahamas or something. I was just dark as you could be because that emulsion oil, I guess it didn't hurt us. I sprayed some other stuff I'm not sure of, but
they rub it on now to get a good suntan.
Yeah. So it worked, you know. So So the answer to your question is, and my son. So that you take Crip. That's my granddad, but called him Crip. Crip, my dad, me, and my son Tommy. And Tommy worked in the packing house up there when Bob Blair was the general manager of Mount Oro Growers. And Tommy go up there and make boxes and clean up after they shut the packing house down. So,
well, and not only were, you working in the packing house and everything else, but all those ladies that were grading and packing fruit were providing a second income for those families who really needed a second income. And if you were going to design a way for these ladies to have a job that would be perfect, you'd want one where the packing house didn't open until after school started. Packing house shut down before school was really over, and you could work hard on a piecework, and you could still be a mom and still bring in that extra income to the family, which was so important. And in the summertime, like you said, a lot of the packing house workers were putting fuel boxes back together and cleaning everything up and so forth. And so the packing house was the heart of Mount Dora, and the 2 or 3 of them were, and the small ones were the same way.
And it really was, and I think the remarkable thing about it, that the original packing house was constructed by David Simpson in the late 1800s, 1870, right. I've been told. And that 2-story structure remained there the entire life of what we know as Mount Dora Growers. It was a small packing house for the Simpsons at first, and through the evolution of Mount Dora Growers, it was added on to, and every picture you look, that 2-story Simpson packing house is still right there standing until they finally tore it down. And Tommy goes back to, at first it was all spruce made boxes, everything was shipped out. My family shipped out in half bushel and bushel baskets, wood bushel baskets. And then along comes technology, and now we have cardboard, and we have glue, and we have staples, and so all that history goes down.
Technology comes in, and you're right. It replaces a lot of stuff, but the process is still the same. We still hand pick all the fresh fruit. It's washed, graded, waxed, packed, and shipped out, and we've been doing that for 150 years. Yeah, it's rather remarkable that that a lot of this stuff has still been preserved. Bob Simpson gave the packing house equipment that was in the family's old packing house to the Morris Foundation in Winter Park. For some reason, they were interested. They actually have citrus groves a little bit, and they owned a grove on Genius Drive in Winter Park. Got to be the highest valued grove property in the state. Anyway, so Bob gave them the old packing house equipment. They hauled it over to Winter Park, refurbished it all, built a packing house around it, and it runs.
Wow.
And
that's great.
I have been trying my best to get the Morse family, anybody's listening to this, to work with us to open that up and to make it available for people to, as a museum type thing. I've got 4 38-foot picking ladders that Fred Saunders salvaged when R.D. Keene tore his place down in Winter Garden. And I'd heard about big ladders, and you can't really appreciate what it was like until you see one.
Well, you look at the early groves were all seedling groves, and they
Yeah.
were 40 feet. They didn't have toppers.
Well, you couldn't reach the first
And
fruit from the ground anyway.
it was all, you had a 36-foot wood ladder you put up in there, and you had a 90-pound canvas bag around your shoulder, and you went.
I've heard that that there were young men that thought they could do quite well harvesting fruit, and after the first week of doing that, they decided that might not be the best way to make a living. But there were those that did, and were an important part of the industry. Those that harvested. So I've talked to some people who worked with your granddad, and they said, yeah, we had a meeting on every Monday morning, and said we'd be gathered, and we'd hear him coming down the hall. So tell me about your grandfather, Crip. What he was injured early on, and that was where he got
that's
his
why
name.
they called him Crip. But these days it would be very impolite,
Derogatory, wouldn't it? Yeah.
to call somebody Crip. But it was a term of endearment in those days. And when Crip was 12 years old, he was turkey hunting way down on south of Gatlin Avenue in Orlando, in the woods, and he shot his heel off with a 12-gauge shotgun. And so he went through high school. That's why, part of the Navy story, I don't know why they ever took him in the Navy.
That's right.
Because let me tell you, Sammy can tell you, he wore a big old lace-up shoe, and he walked. He kind of had a big kind of gait to it. It was a limp, but it was a gait almost that you would see. Anyway, so that's how he got the nickname Crip, and nobody called him Gerald. G.B. Hurlbert was his name, but everybody that's Crip Hurlbert. And my granddad was kind of a sport model, as was Sammy's daddy and them. I mean, he took this job real serious here, and when he came here from Dr. Phillips, and they did a lot of innovative things, okay? And my granddaddy, he was the type of guy, he was on the board of directors of the National Apple Convention. Now that sounds strange for a citrus guy, right? But he was making contacts, and he brought a lot of people that bought groves here in Florida from Virginia that came down here. And so Outdoor Growers was growing and growing, and Pop was pushing the technology into it. And he had some really smart guys working for him. You know, in any good citrus operation, if you're in the packing business too, you need somebody who knows something about machinery. You better have a good engineer. And Dick Peacock was his engineer down there. And he built stuff that you wouldn't believe. I mean, they built this, everything was about trying to handle fruit in bulk. Okay? They built a thing, they called it a Sputnik, because it looked like Dad said it looked like a piece of Russian equipment, a tank. It was a big thing. And it was harvesting, picking up these big bins, and before tubs, and it was dumping it in this truck and bringing it to the packing house in bulk, okay? And trailers they would bring in, they were working with the coloring side of it. So Outdoor Growers were one of the first. I won't say because there'll be somebody say, well, we did that down in Polk County or whatever, but everything was about technology. He learned that with working with Dr. Phillips. Dr. Phillips was a brilliant man, and he learned that the less we had to put our hands on it and move it around, so they would bring fruit right into the back of them trailers and put tarps on them, and they'd do that heat room gas to take the gas in, and they found a way to color the orange all the way around. His engineer figured it out while sitting in a bulk trailer. And so my granddad was a really innovative kind of guy, and he was, Florida Citrus Mutual, and he was on the board, and I used to go to Tampa to the meetings, go down there and sit there as a little kid, and I finally said, Pop, I don't want to go anymore. He said, why? I said, the cigarette smoke's killing me. I mean, it was. I'd ride down there in that car with him, we had the first air conditioning car in the back there, and man, the smoke can be in that car be that thick, and then you go into the meeting down there in Tampa, and it'd be the same thing. So my granddad was that type of guy. Sammy knew him just like it was, my granddaddy, everybody in town knew him. And see, back in the day, Mount Dora Growers was the biggest employer in Mount Dora. There was nothing else. I mean, everybody either had somebody that worked at the growers in the wintertime, the summertime. They packed fruit, like you said, part-time. And in the summertime, they were rebuilding field boxes out there. I can see them out there in front of the packing house now. Bang, bang, bang with hammers, rebuilding field boxes. And that's when Pop said, you know, we need to start handling this fruit. You get away from that field box. That's taking too much effort and time. And so Crip, I never called him Crip. My granddaddy, he was an innovative kind of guy.
You know, it seems to me from what people I've talked to, the ones who were successful, and I can tell you, I bet you I can tell you right now that your grandfather, an innovator, your grandfather was a networker and a marketer. If you can't sell it, I don't care how much you work your butt off, if you can't sell it. And the one thing that strikes me too is that people that were at Mount Dora Growers knew that they worked with your grandfather, not for your grandfather. The more I check around, it was like one big family. Whether it was, didn't you tell me you had somebody that worked with your family, with your folks? Or
Well, we had, actually, I had two ladies, a mother and her daughter, that were the fresh fruit packers for our little operation. And when my parents closed down the operation and started going outsourcing the packing and everything, that's the first place they both went because they needed packers up there. They always needed packers. And I think at that time they had close to 40 full staff packers going.
But it was like a big family.
It was.
And you know, when
truly.
Kids nowadays, they'll change jobs at the drop of a hat. When you were growing up, when all of us were growing up, I mean, when you took a job, they almost had to run you off because you felt like you were part of a family.
That's all we had here. We didn't have restaurants to go work at. I mean, citrus is everywhere. I tell people now, everywhere you look and you see trees, pine trees and houses, those were groves. I mean, it was just.
Well, look over there, Sammy, right across from you.
Yeah.
Mr. Heiss, that was all Mr. Heiss grows over there, right there. All Heiss grows. Families, the Connors down there, Ocklawaha Nursery, you know. I mean, yeah. I'm sitting here listening to this, and I'm saying, dadgum, I wish I didn't. You know, when I was little, Sammy, I wasn't all happy about having one to go around because I knew what that meant for me. You know, but I didn't realize, and when I smelled the orange blossoms, boy, you know, man, that stuff's kind of thick today, right? I'd give anything to look back over now and just see nothing but beautiful orange.
It would be great. And I used to get on the county commissioners because everybody wants progress and development. And Henry Swanson, the agent in Orange County, did a little story, a little checkerboard thing, and all these studies were made. And the way we could solve all of the budget issues in Central Florida is to get rid of all the people and get all the grows, because there wasn't a citrus tree in this area that went to school or checked out a book from the library or traveled down the road, got damn little need for fire and police protection. They paid a huge ad valorem taxes from agriculture, and they got almost no services. But it was a good situation for everybody. The packing houses and the Grove Care provided so many jobs. How many years were you involved with Mount Dora? You were assistant production manager? Or
Yeah, after
get everything
after the
done?
family sold all the property. I was just starting over at Lake Sumter, and of course I needed gas money and I needed book money, so I started testing fruit, and this is '67. I started testing fruit for the harvesting department, which was part-time. I'd go to school part-time. And there again, everybody wanted to have the earliest fruit possible that pass all the sugar tests, the bricks. So I would go every afternoon and work for 4 or 5 hours just testing fruit to be sure what grove passed. And at that time, they were harvesting about close to 20,000 acres of citrus at that time. Grove care production, they were taking care of about 4,000. So I worked my way through that through school. I finally made it over to the shipping end of the packing house, and that was either in a box cart night, putting in boxes, loading fruit up, or by then a lot of the rail was phasing out, and then the semis the trucking industry was coming in. So I got a little bit of both. After I finished up my college, I'd gotten a degree in education because I really wanted to teach. I'd had all the citrus that I wanted growing up, and I'll never forget, I went over and applied to be a teacher over in Tavares, the Lake County School. And the starting salary was $11,200. So I came back, and at that time, the management had changed around some through the death of Kerry Colley, and Bob Blair stepped up. So there was a vacancy in the production department. So I went up and I talked to Frank Whidden, who was running that, and the bottom line is he offered me $12,500. So I said, you know, that's $1,000 difference. So, and I got a truck with it. So I stayed in the production with Frank for a little over 4 years before I finally went to another avenue and changed courses in life.
Start putting in irrigation first.
Yeah, well, I did that. Had a nice
He rode the trencher at my house.
But
I designed it, and he put it in, and he'd tell me, John, I don't think you want to really do that. This is going to work out far better for you.
But Tommy and I talk about this all the time. We were so fortunate to grow up in the era we did. And I know my father told me that. I've heard his story, but you know, we look back, and there was a lot of value. If you wanted something, you worked for it. And it was hard work. It was dirty work, but it was fun work. And at the end of the day, or end of the week, and sometimes in the summer, there wasn't it was 7 days a week, and you irrigated again at night. So, you know, we were fortunate, I think.
Well, Jerry Chicone used to always give me a rough time because, and Jerry really didn't have much reason to do this because as I talked to growers that built character on the end of a hoe handle, I'm sure that Jerry didn't have a whole lot of hours that he spent on the end of a hoe handle. But I grew up in Orlando. I was a city boy, and I tell this story so many times. My first involvement with citrus was a grapefruit tree in the neighbor's backyard. It was a huge, gigantic grapefruit tree, and the two boys that lived there and myself, we'd climb up in that grapefruit tree almost every day. And there were places where the pilot sat and the bombardier sat and the navigator sat, you know, and then we'd go eat tangerines. But as I realized that people like you that grew up in the business, and Catherine Hanson, my wife, grew up on a dairy, and what you learned was a strong work ethic that has stayed with you, and you guys aren't going to sit around and just do nothing. Can you imagine a life as a teenager in front of a screen with these things you work with your hands? And I'm sure that it'll all work out. Gus over here plays games with his kids, and that's a way of interacting. He doesn't even have to worry about hoeing trees, but it was a way of life that gave you a work ethic and gave you some.
It was a true era, a good era, and like Tommy said, you know, we don't get the orange blossom smell anymore. We don't get riding through Plymouth, get to smell the old concentrate plant there, and I mean, these are things that are embedded in your life forever.
But we can do this. We can tell the story. We can share with people. And I was telling Sam earlier, Tommy, that I want so badly for people to tell their stories, and it runs the gamut. I don't know if you know Gator Brown, Jerry Brown,
Very well.
And they decided that they were going to tell their story, and they hired Dan Tracy, who was a reporter for the Sentinel, and he has a book on the Brown family. Now, it was an unusual family from the standpoint that that Gator's dad, Jerry, married a Peters from Winter Garden, and Mr. Peters was like your grandfather. He was actively involved in the industry and a lot of things going on. Gator's dad was in I can't tell you, Mel, but it was some special Marine operation in World War II, and it was, went through a number of things, and he was involved with it. And so there's a story, but so many families have these great stories, and Sam and I were talking, I wish my dad had told me some of these things, and you remember it, but we got it written down. I got a great life story from Steve and David Knowles on their family. They put it together. I tried to get some information on the Eichelberger family because they've got a label in Eustis, and there's almost nothing exists, an obituary. And so our message is that we want to tell the story of families, and your grandchildren, they might tolerate you now, but the older they get, the more interested they will be in those stories. So that's we're having fun doing this, and I'm getting a lot.
We're thankful that we have somebody that cares enough about it, John, to take it to this level, because.
Well, it's been a thrill for me, and there are little things that come up and I'll just pop up. The first citrus experiment station in the world was in Eustis.
I did not know that.
And a letter was sent from Mrs. Tom Platt to Washington, to USDA, saying we need some help growing citrus here. And in 1892, the USDA sent a couple of guys to Eustis to set up an experiment station. Walter Schwingle and John Weber, and they found a Frank Savage over there, and Frank was really interested in the technical side, and they started breeding in Orlando Tangelos and Sunburst and all those as a result of it. And it's great. I wrote up that story, and Dr. Cooper from the USD has a story. But in the back of my mind, I'm wondering, who in the hell was Mrs. Platt that she would write a letter to Washington and they would send people down to do science? So about 2 weeks ago, Brenda sends me an article about a Dr. Stivender, who was a dentist in Leesburg in the late 1880s and in the earlier part of the century, and his old house was being remodeled or torn or something. And so there was a little story about Stivender and some of the early citrus people, Colonel Lanier and so forth. And then it says, and Tom Platt, U.S. Senator from Lake County and on the executive committee of the National Republican Party.
Wow.
Gee, this is Tom Platt. No, that's Mr. Tom Platt's wife, Mr. Tom Platt, who's a senator who's on the executive board of the Republican Party. Now I see why the USDA sent a couple of scientists down to Eustis. So, and that then triggered into this extensive plant improvement program. So we get away from the seedlings that your families were growing, and now we're growing budded trees, and now we're growing Orlando Tangelos, and Lake Region rides all through the Depression and survives. And how your grandfather took the co-op through the Depression and survived, is a testament to his ability to either be more efficient through technology, develop a sound marketing program, and have a fantastic staff that worked with him.
You're right, and I'm glad you said that again, remarked on it, because some of the stuff I'm going to share with you in pictures after we do this recording here is my granddad's deal was always this. Now, he said this once, he said it 100 times, and I've used the same philosophy in my life. And my granddad said, he used to tell everybody, we are here for the growers. We are not here to be the biggest or we're here for our growers. We're here to support our growers. That was his big mantra, okay? And he knew that once you had your certain number of growers here, you need to go find other people to get involved, like you said, like the Howie did, bringing people in. And that's why he got involved with like the International Apple Association, those kind of things. And he traveled and marketed Florida citrus, started to. And I mean, not a day in my life, and I lived with my granddad for a while, And I can tell you, when we had this orange juice here this morning, every morning we had orange juice and a slice of grapefruit, you know, every day. And he talked about it, about citrus and what it meant to everybody. And just about everybody Sammy and I grew up with. Even if they weren't, their family wasn't in the citrus business, they wouldn't have been here if there hadn't been a citrus business. That's the thing.
Well, do you think that all these churches in town would have been built without citrus money? Do you think that Raybaum's Hardware would have survived without the money from the packing house employees in there? You know,
Exactly.
so it was just a ripple effect that started there, and it was fantastic. And so the stories that I'm hearing are the same ones that you're telling me. It was hard work, but it developed character. It was fun, and you just can't imagine what it was like to have that synergy and that relationship that everybody had that were involved in citrus. You know, I worked with the Mormons for quite a while when I was with my extension agent. I had Osceola County in my territory, and I went down there one morning, and we met in the conference room, and the blackboard was covered with Bible study they'd had that morning. Those kids on the Mormon ranch, they're down at the office at 5 o'clock in the morning for Bible study. Then they get on the bus and then they go and everything else. But I was impressed with the importance they have of family, and they continue that in their farming operation. If you're a boy and you do well in high school, Tommy, your summers you get to be a cowboy, and you ride, and you're with the cowboy, and you got your horse and your trailer. The girls, if they do well, they got to work in the grove. Now I got granddaughters, you got granddaughters, and what would they say if, guess what, Peyton, you get to work in the groves this summer. I would go down there before school was out, and whatever the project was, we'd have a little class. And I'll never forget this. One year, they were going to pull vines. And so I went down and we talked about the various vines that were in citrus, and, you know, what kind of root system they might have and everything else. And so there must have been 8 or 10 high school girls spent the summer in the groves, the Mormon ranch, pulling vines. I went down there one day and lunched and meet Frank Judd, and all these little four-wheelers come flying in from out in the grove to have lunch. Here are these teenage girls covered in dirt, filthy, dirty, laughing, having the best time, talking about, we saw this big armadillo out there. Can you imagine? But they enjoyed it. They were part of the family, even though they were working filthy, dirty, pulling out milkweed vine and everything else out of the groves. I'm just thinking, you know, and I'm sure that's what it was like here, you know. You'd find some mischief to get into, you know. You'd haul that aluminum pipe.
Made it fun.
Yeah. Or the one time where the pipe had been out there in the grove and y'all cranked it up the first time and there was a damn rabbit in it and it went all the way to the end and plugged up the pipe and you had to dig him out, you know, those kind of things.
Tommy and I really liked the winter part of it. As we got older, our parents would go up to the Club Rudo in Mount Dora, and that's where they'd spend their freeze night. While Tommy and I, every hour, would have to come out and check thermometers and go back to the Rudo to report what temperatures were everywhere. We didn't have radios.
Well, I heard that he did that, and he pulled in there and he said, Dad, there's no problem out there. Pull that thermometer out of his back pocket. See, it's 77 still.
I tell you what, one time, remember Jelsma Grove over there at Howie Arch?
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Jelsma had come here from Virginia, from Washington, D.C.
Train man, wasn't he?
Yeah, and they brought him down here because he had, you know, money. He bought the growth. And I was out there checking temperatures, and Jimmy Cooper was the production man. And I was in high school, and this is a true story. And I called in a temperature light. I said, you know, I called in one like 28. I went back there, you know, making my rounds. When I got back, it was 25. And they said, oh, they said, you sure you're reading that right? And I said, it's 25. Okay. And then they checked with the government thermometer over here and everything.
High
It's
sparring.
right there at high. Okay. So it kept on going. I mean, it went down like 22, whatever. And so they said, I'll never forget this. Hope we can't get in trouble this late in life. But there was a pile of tires I mean, a huge mountain of tires over there that was sitting on in a low spot that they had used years ago to fire. And they came back with a radio and said, light that pile. And I back then said, light the pile. Because I'm looking at this thing. They said, yeah, and of course I had in the back of my truck, I had heat, because there were some places we had heaters and everything. And I went there and started, putting
Your flambeau heater, you had it.
Flambeau heater
Yeah.
all around. I lit that thing up, and I bet it looked like the space shuttle. That thing went woof, and it started burning, and there was a little drift, just a little drift. It wasn't, you know how it is when it gotten really cold, and that cold was coming in hard. I mean, that's a night I heard people calling them, we got a 19, and those scary things. I think I brought the temperature up 28 in that thing over there, and I mean, it lit up the world. Of course, the next day you could tell we'd lit up the world over there. But those are the kind of stories that Sammy and I tell about.
Well, the power reminds me in 1957, the freeze of 57. Dad had a very similar pile, only his was lighter knots. His granddad, and when they cleared all that property to put the grove in, they kept all the lighter knots, the stumps, and they had piles and piles of them. And for last resort, there wasn't stack heaters back in 57. They actually took, the men that worked there all during the day took trailer loads and stacked up these lighter knots throughout the grove. And it got so cold that Dad said, let's fire up the big one and then burn up all that lighter wood, and it took 2 days to burn it up. But it was just the last straw. What do you do? Do anything to save that fruit. And by that time it was, we need to save the trees.
Yeah.
So,
Well, those experiences on cold nights, the whole community was involved. Dixie Royal tells me that Golden Jim had 40,000 heaters that they had to get going. And in the grove business, you might have a rust mite problem, or you need to put your fertilizer out, and you can debate, and you and Frank Whidden, well, should we use chlorobenzolate, or do you think just a sulfur dust will do? And you talk about it, and Frank says, okay, Sam said, Monday, let's get the sprayers going and we'll start. On a freeze, you don't do that.
no.
We got to make a decision quickly. Well, the school board in Lake County allowed any kid that was going to light heaters, they got an excused absence the next day from
Sure,
school.
absolutely.
And so on a cold night, Golden Jim was just crawling with high school kids, and all these guys were out and
Sammy's, one time, Sammy and I were coming back from Winter Park. It was late at night, and we'd get those freezers that come in. They didn't have it predicted right, okay, and it was only supposed to go to like 32, something, and all of a sudden, we got a real, like you said, something happened, and the temperature went. We were coming back from Winter Park, and I was driving the car, and I turned the windshield wiper on. Just hit it one time. When I did, that thing iced up completely. Right now we're right now. And so we ran out here somewhere and checked the temperature, and he called his dad. I don't remember.
No, we went over to the house.
We went to the house.
And I
that's
really
right.
didn't want to go in and wake my dad up. And so I was
Buck
very
knows.
quiet, and I knocked on the door, and he was awake, and I said, Dad, it's bad out here. It was in the low 20s.
It was in 20s.
And I'll never forget. He said, by this time it's 4 o'clock in the morning. He said,
Yeah.
what the hell am I going to do at 4 o'clock in the morning? I'm going to go back to bed. There's nothing I can
That's
do."
right. That's right. That's what it was. Yeah.
well, those dates are embedded in the memory of every grower, aren't they? I mean, all I have to do is say December 13th, 1962,
Yeah.
and everybody knows, that was a big freeze that wiped us out. And of course, the whole picture changed for us so dramatically in the 80s when we had the 83, 85, and 89 freeze. and just about the time we thought maybe we figured freezes out, we get greening, and so it won't be like it was, and I really admire those guys in South Florida who are fighting the battle,
And they're fighting.
and it's so difficult to deal with a disease like this. And you know, we've gone through those here. We've gone through burrowing nematode. We've gone through Mediterranean fruit fly. You were talking about citrus canker and burning all the fruit. There was a man in Mount Dora named Harry Fogg. Mr. Fogg came from the U.S. Forest Service in Maine in 1915 to fight canker in Florida. And so canker has an outbreak then, and Mr. Fogg told me that that the canker crews would leave on Monday. They had tents, and they would go out in the groves, and they would literally spend a week. And the procedure they followed was they put on coveralls that had been soaked in bichloride of mercury, I think. They put the coveralls on. They had a torch. Every tree that had canker, they burned it right there in the ground. At noon, he said they'd come back, take off their coveralls, dip them back in that solution while they ate lunch. And they did that for months until they, quote, finally eradicated canker. But anyway, Mr. Fogg and I and Dr. Castle went over and found where Frank Savage's house was, and I said, Mr. Fogg, how do you know that's where the house was? He said, you see that flame vine growing there? He said, you can't kill that damn flame vine. that was on Mr. Savage's fence in front of his house. And so we have those kind of those folks and those stories and everything that take place. Well, you know, it's more than just fun to reminisce. I think it's critical that we record these stories and we let people know what it was like. And if it wasn't for people like your grandfathers that were here, that kept this ship going, that steered it down the right path, and provided employment, encouragement for all those people, you know, you kind of, hard to imagine what it would have been like otherwise, you know. So it's
Going back on just an end note about Tommy's granddad, everybody called him Pops. And with the heel and the big shoe he had, he was very unstable. But as a young kid, I never could figure out if it was the early times that he had been drinking that made him that way, or if it really was that heel. So they all enjoyed their bourbon.
They did. I mean, the bourbon industry today be real proud of those citrus guys. I'm telling you, because they take their pop, you know. And it was okay because we were Episcopalian, so we were allowed to do it back then.
well, and there was a camaraderie, not only, you know, between with every group that was there.
Yeah, it wasn't one group against the other. I mean, everybody helped everybody out. If you growing up, if we had a disc that went out, a bearing went out, you went over there to Cal McCaffey, and he said, "Sure, I'll hook up to it and go." And
you know, Sam, that's really critical, because I've put on thousands of meetings, and there wasn't a citrus grower or a production manager that I ever came across that wasn't more than anxious to share what they were doing with others.
Sure.
Can you imagine in the Elon Musk sharing what his secrets with Ford? You know,
That's right.
But
You're right.
but it was. And it was there, and if you needed something, and
everybody came together,
they had it, and they did it. And I can remember some really interesting stories that you find growers had kind of certain interest, and I never knew Jimmy Cooper very well, but he was one of the elite production managers, and Don Kemp. And those kind of guys,
he was old school.
Yeah, I looked up to them in awe when I first came. But I want to share a couple stories about Mount Dora growers. I was a young agent, and we were just starting to look at mechanical harvesting. And I was really excited about this. So I'm 99% sure your grandfather said, can you come over and give a little presentation to our board about mechanical harvesting and where we might be going and everything else? Well, the kid was excited, you know. So I went to Mount Dora Growers board meeting, and I gave them my little spiel on mechanical harvesting. I was so proud of myself. I talked about abscission chemicals and everything else. And I looked out, and they were mostly older gentlemen, and they were polite. They were tolerating me. They sat back there. I got through my presentation, and somebody said, okay, what you got? And all of a sudden, this group came alive. And there was excitement building and everything else. And they all reached in their pocket. They pulled out 8 or 10 bills. They looked at them, and this guy would say, I got 4 2s. And this guy.
Liar's poker.
And so they were, so I don't know what the game was, but it was
Liar's poker.
yeah. Man, if they'd gotten half as excited about my presentation on abscission chemicals as they did on having the game afterwards. And then, you know, I was kind of, damn, I thought I had a pretty good presentation, but the older I got, the more I thought about it. You know, mechanical harvesting was way down the road. This was, you know, this was nice to know about, but we had pickers, and they were getting the fruit harvested and so forth. So anyway, I've learned that sometimes you give the little presentation, and they thank you and they move on. But it was an eye-opening experience for a young guy in the business. So it was fun. And those kind of folks, Mr. Who was it? Peter Cap. Oh, Peterson was the guy that was on Mutual's board, and he was president of the co-op for a number of years. He wasn't the general manager, but he was always the peacemaker, and he was the guy that if I'd make some quote that was came out in the paper that he thought wasn't really on target, I'd get a call and a little instruction. The one who was best with that, though, was John Nelson at Golden Gym, and I'd make some stupid comment about imports, and I'd get a call from Mr. Nelson the next morning inviting me for lunch at Pine Meadows. And I'd have lunch, and Mr. Nelson would explain to me the fine parts of marketing and having product and the need to bring juice in from Brazil. So a learning process, and you know, it's the way the message is delivered sometimes, you know, not, don't beat them to death, but you kind of introduce the idea and so forth to them. So anyway, well, we're going to dedicate the sign in Mount Dora. Oh, I think it's the 24th of August. I'll make sure you know, and the Mount Dora label will be on one side, Roxy's going to be on the other. And the 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th Simpson growing citrus will represent the sponsor and talk a little bit about citrus and Mount Dora and the role that it played and so forth. And the mayor has been extremely supportive of the effort, and the city council will pass a proclamation basically saying that they are supportive of the effort to tell the story of citrus, and that citrus was the major component of the economy in Mount Dora for years. So I'm pleased that we're going to be able to do that. We got a website. Your video and Tom's phone will be on the Florida Citrus Hall of Fame, and there's some other great interviews there, and it's really exciting that we have some of this stuff documented, and we need to do a better job of getting it. So start telling stories to your grandchildren, have them write some of this stuff down. You know, the little incidents that come to mind. You know, when we were talking about putting all the canker fruit here in the pond and those kind of things. You know, and And
You
see,
told him that story earlier?
Yeah.
that's just not the cross pond. That's got a story. That's got a story
Way
to it.
before Cross Pond.
And
Amen.
and so there's stories like that all over the
Yeah.
place around here. The the lady that had the grove on the other side of Sadler over there that had all the diapreppies in there. Oh, what was her name?
You're not talking about the Greer?
Greer, yeah.
Yeah.
And all the problem they had, and that grove was just so full of diapreppies, and Jennings Row and the neighbors around here were worried about, them being the source of diapreppies for all this neighborhood. This was a hot area for diapreppies,
Really?
and with trying to get it under control and things like that.
All that was part of the original homestead of Dr. Sadler, all that. All the way back to the Atlantic coastline. I think it was 1,200 acres in there.
good citrus land. All this
Yeah.
stuff was good citrus
Oh,
land.
yeah.
Yeah.
And which is interesting. Well, guys, I'm about run out. I appreciate it.
We appreciate it, John, that you've taken this thing and not let people forget there was citrus here at one time.
I'm really fortunate, and I know that God has a plan for every one of us. The hard thing is just figuring out what it is, And I was going to be an engineer when I went to Gainesville, and I found out in a hurry that thermodynamics and statics and advanced calculus didn't match up with my skill set. And I was lucky that I had been introduced to ag engineering, so I shifted over into agriculture. And in spite of the fact that my first experience with citrus was flying a grapefruit tree, I was lucky in that the growers all adopted me and tolerated me. And
You had some big shoes to fill, too.
Bob Norris, impossible.
Yeah.
Impossible. He was a legend. And, Sam, the most fantastic thing about Bob Norris, he worked for maybe a year or two for Mutual, then he moved to North Carolina. And he would send me letters every couple months. I was in the grocery store and I saw such and such, and I read your last newsletter. And I want to tell you what a fantastic job you're doing. The growers are so lucky to have someone like you.
Wow.
He built me up, never insinuated, that you ain't going to fill my shoes.
Right.
And Henry Swanson was the same way.
Yeah.
And Henry basically turned over the citrus responsibility in Orange County to me when I came on working 2 counties. Henry grew up in Eustis as a 4-H'er, and always supportive and everything else. So, I was blessed. I was not an outcast. I was accepted, and
You should be proud where you hung your hat.
I found a mentor early on, which is important. You had families who were mentors, but I found a mentor up in Umatilla. Bob Klingbill worked for Golden Gym. Did you know Bob?
Yes, I do. Very well.
Bob was
Did.
just a remarkable guy. Remarkable guy. We lost him way too early, and Bob would come by and knock on my window at the office, and we'd go have lunch, and I would ride with him for hours. And he had jeweler's glasses on, lens on his glasses, and he'd ride into a grove and flick those things down. He could pick an orange, look at that through the glass, throw it out after about 4 rows.
We need to start.
He knew where the rust mites were coming up and when to spray. Just had a feel for it. Just like you, if you were going to pick a sample for a maturity test, you knew that I'm going to go on the north side of the tree and I'm going to pick them, down low, because that's the last ones that are going to reach maturity. And people don't understand that citrus matures on the tree. Once you pick it, it doesn't get any better. That's as good as it gets. And so, to keep unscrupulous packers in the early days would ship out fruit that wasn't mature. The Department of Citrus had standards, and so you couldn't ship a fruit unless it had a certain minimum level of sugar, and the ratio of sugar to acid was a certain point, and you couldn't have too many blemishes, and so we did that. Nowadays, if you ship poor fruit, the guy's going to come back and buy from you again. So those standards are not quite as important as they used to be, but it was critical that that when you pulled a sample that you weren't always pulling the fruit that was going to mature first, because I can imagine if you pulled a sample and they said that the Sadler block at Tangerine passed, and they picked that fruit, and the inspector in the packing house said it didn't pass.
Yeah, you ran on the cautious side.
Somebody's grandfather was going to tell some little kid that he needed to do a better job when he's testing fruit like that. So it was all a team effort.
I never could figure out for a long time. They'd bring these samples in, 3 or 4 bags from this block and whatever, and I'd sit there and grind for the juice for hours and hours, and only come in and take a couple little vials and test that. And I was always told, don't throw any of that juice away, that especially the grapefruit juice. And one day I was in there and opened up down where we used to test it, I opened up a closet, and I've never seen so many vodka bottles in all my life. So they weren't going to let that juice go down the drain.
Yeah, well, there are all kind of stories like that. You know, one time I was talking about how growers had different areas of specialization, and I found a lot of growers were frustrated ag engineers, and talk about your grandfather and finding someone. And there is no doubt in my mind that the most important person in an operation is the mechanic. Bob and I were partners on a sprayer that contract sprayed for Golden Jim. Farina contract sprayed for Golden Jim. Bob and I would push to get 25 tanks out a week, and Nick's turning out 100. And what in the heck is going on? But every night, Nick and his dad would service their equipment. They never had a breakdown. Bob and I had a flat tire on the back of the tractor. We had a business for 4 days.
That's true.
And so without the mechanic in the packing house to keep that equipment going, one guy keeps 50 packers going. If a belt breaks down, you got 50 people sitting around doing nothing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the packer, I mean the mechanic and the marketer were the key people. And,
well, I guess that's why a lot of the co-ops went to a bigger co-op like Seal Sweet for their marketing.
Yeah, you had to be really good size to have your own marketing department. Lake Region was the largest shipper of fresh fruit in Lake County for a number of years, and they did their own market. They had a sales crew over there, and in the summertime they would travel around to buyers and wine and dine them and so forth. And it all started when Mr. Pravat realized that he had a unique product in the Orlando Tangelo, and he managed to garner about 95% of all the Orlandos through Lake Region, and so that was his hook. And so he could sell you 5,000 boxes of Orlandos, and you could make a bunch of money on it, and then you'd take the other 100,000 boxes of Valencias and Hamlins and grapefruit because you wanted those Orlandos. They brought customers into your store.
Yeah. Wow.
And I'm sure your grandfather he knew the ways to get to people and how to do it. You know, we used the crate labels for advertising, and so when a Mount Dora label showed up in the Philadelphia auction, the smart buyers knew that's quality fruit. We're going to buy that. Yeah. And so he managed to keep that going through other avenues and dealing with them. So it's been a great ride, and we're gonna keep telling the stories.
Well, let's keep riding as long as we can, John.
We're gonna go. We'll come back. We'll come back to this porch anytime. It's fantastic.
The new cowboy has technology, with him now. He has a smartphone and technology's still going.
It is.
I can tell you that calls about my big mowers for my hook behind the tractor to mow the pasture we was fixing. I told him, you call me as soon as you get that thing finished. Well, they're calling me.
But I bet you that if you're like me, if you got a real problem, I go to my grandkids to solve the technology issues.
If it has anything to do with any technology, you're right. And that grandkid can be a second grader. It's amazing what they can do.
It is. All right.
Gentlemen, thank you. John.
Thank you.
Thanks for being there.
Thank you, my friend. Enjoyed it.
Gus, you got us.
Gus,
Gus, great job.